Recently, Russian President Vladimir Putin made headlines once again. Speaking at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, he declared, quote, "Russians and Ukrainians are one people, and in that sense, the whole of Ukraine is ours." He then suggested that Russian troops may move to take control of Sumy, a regional capital in northeastern Ukraine, as part of a buffer zone to protect Russian territory. Putin told his audience, mostly made up of foreign investors, state officials, and the press, "We have a saying, or a parable, where the foot of a Russian soldier steps, that is ours." To many in the West, this sounds like the revival of Imperial Russia. But to Putin and his supporters, it's part of a long-standing belief that modern Ukraine is a product of artificial separation, not legitimate sovereignty. To understand Putin's words, we have to rewind far back in the history. In the 9th century, long before Moscow even existed, there was Kievan Rus, a medieval state whose capital was Kiev. It is widely considered the birthplace of East Slavic civilization, the ancestor of modern Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. Both Ukraine and Russia claim the cultural and historical legacy of Kievan Rus. But after the Mongol invasions, the histories of the two diverged sharply. Russia grew around Moscow. Ukraine, meanwhile, spent centuries under Polish-Lithuanian, Austro-Hungarian, and eventually Russian imperial control. In the 20th century, both nations were part of the Soviet Union. But for many Ukrainians, that period was marked by oppression, from Stalin's Holodomor famine, which killed millions, to forced Russification. In 1991, as the Soviet Union collapsed, Ukraine voted overwhelmingly, over 90%, to become independent. And yes, Putin is technically correct about one thing. Ukraine's 1991 declaration included a commitment to neutrality. That meant it would not join military alliances like NATO. But since then, much has changed, especially after 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea and backed separatists in the Donbass. Ukraine's leaders have increasingly sought Western protection and integration with the EU and NATO. To Putin, Ukraine isn't just a neighbor. It's part of Russia's identity, historically, culturally, spiritually. That's why he called the post-Soviet arrangement, where Ukraine drifted westward, a geopolitical tragedy. He believes NATO expansion into what he considers Russia's traditional sphere of influence is not just a strategic loss, but a personal betrayal. So when he says Ukraine is ours, he's not just talking about land. He's talking about history, emotion, and the idea of restoring a fractured legacy. Let's zoom in on Sumy, the city Putin now threatens to take. Located just 25 kilometers from the Russian border, Sumy was one of the first places attacked when Russia invaded in 2022. While Ukraine successfully pushed back the offensive, the region remains vulnerable. Putin says Russia is creating a buffer zone in border areas like Sumy to protect Russian territory. But critics say this is just another step toward incremental occupation. As of now, Russia controls about 20% of Ukraine, including nearly all of Luhansk, most of Donetsk, and large parts of Zaporizhzhia and Kherson, not to mention Crimea, annexed over a decade ago. Ukrainian leaders wasted no time in responding. Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha called Putin's remarks cynical and said they showed complete disdain for U.S.-led peace efforts. President Volodymyr Zelensky, who has often said Russia and Ukraine are not the same people, dismissed Putin's statements as colonial rhetoric in disguise. Western governments, including the US and EU, continue to support Ukraine's sovereignty and reject all territorial claims by Moscow as illegal under international law. Some historians, even in the West, acknowledge that Ukraine and Russia do share deep cultural roots. The Russian language is widely spoken in parts of Ukraine. Many families span across the border. And yes, Ukraine did declare neutrality in 1991. From a legalistic point of view, Putin is referencing real facts. But here's the key difference. Shared history does not equal shared destiny, and neutrality is not permanent, especially when invaded. Putin is betting on time and fatigue. He hopes the world will tire of supporting Ukraine and that slowly Russia can lock in its territorial gains. But Ukraine is betting on something else: sovereignty, resistance, identity. And now, the battle for Ukraine's future, and possibly Sumy, continues. So, what do we make of it? Yes, Ukraine and Russia were once one, but that was centuries ago. Today, they are not one country. They are not one government. And clearly, they are not one people. Whatever comes next will not just be decided by tanks and treaties, but by how the world chooses to remember the past and define the future. Thanks for watching.